Welcome, everyone. So glad you are here today. We're going to get started right away today because we got a lot of territory to cover. Welcome to our webinar entitled Startup Licensing 101 Review and Updates. I'm Kirsten Leute of Osage University Partners, and I head up our university relations efforts here at OUP. Our co-host today for our webinar is certified licensing professionals, and Ashley from CLP will say more on that later. Today's subject is a semi-rehash, semi-update of a series of webinars that our panelists did 5 years ago, and we'll go to the next slide. And so I'm so delighted that we got the gang back together to talk about this particular subject today. I'm going to have them briefly introduce themselves. And Lisa, we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Lisa Norton. I'm the Director of Licensing for Physical Sciences and Engineering at Commotion, which is the University of Washington's tech transfer arm.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
Hi, I'm Rick Friedman with Novus GC. I've been involved in tech transfer for 21 years now. Started at UT Austin at the Office of Technology Commercialization there. Worked at USC Stevens. Spent a total of 9 years in tech transfer, and for the last 12 years now, I guess, I've been in private legal practice. First at a multinational firm, and now at a boutique firm, Novus GC, where a good part of our practice is representing university spinouts.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Nikisha.
Good afternoon. This is Nikisha Holder. I'm an Associate Director of Licensing at Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures. I manage a portfolio of mainly life sciences and diagnostic technologies, and I've been there for about 18 years.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad that all of you could join us again today to talk about this subject and provide us some updates on the subject. But before we dive into our discussion, we'll go into the next slide. We do have a few logistics. We are recording this webinar, and a recording of it will be available both on OUP's partner portal and on our YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know, the partner portal is an online portal for tech transfer officers and researchers at our partner university that's relevant, full of relevant tech transfer and startup content. So once you're in the portal, and you do need to register for our portal if you are not already registered, you'll find a downloadable presentation deck and video link for this webinar on the webinars page. And you can find these resources, both the YouTube channel that I just mentioned, as well as the partner portal via the QR codes that are on this slide. We do encourage questions throughout this webinar. I'm going to repeat this again. We really do like questions. It's a lot of fun to answer them throughout the webinar, but please use the Q&A tool in the Zoom to submit your questions instead of using the chat. That's how I kind of go through and moderate all the questions that we have come in. OUP does have some other upcoming webinars that may be of interest to our audience, including our next in our series of Meet the VCs webinars. The next one is focused on food and agriculture, and we have people from Acre VC and Cultivation Ventures joining us then. And then we have our annual Startup Financing Trends webinar on March 24th. So keep an eye out for invitations and postings for these webinars on OUP's LinkedIn account. So on to the next slide, just a short intro on OUP. For those of you who don't know us, we're a venture capital fund that partners with academic institutions to invest in their startups, typically by exercising participation rights available through their licenses. For those of you who do not know, participation rights are the ability to invest in a future round of a company on the same terms and conditions as other investors. We do have recommended language for participation rights if your institution is not currently including them. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on this. So as part of that partnership that we have with academic institutions, they do share potentially in our profits and receive programmatic support on tech transfer and academic startups. We're now on our fourth fund, and we've made investments in over 150 different companies in all areas of deep science, and many of those companies have had successful exits, which we're very proud about. Including an IPO that happened today. So the next slide shows some of our portfolio companies and the breadth of areas that we invest in. We're always happy to talk about our model. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions on this. We're really delighted to be co-hosting this webinar, as I mentioned, with certified licensing professionals. For full disclosure to everyone, I am the chair of CLP for 2026, but we're going to have Ashley give us a brief overview of CLP.
Great. Thank you, Kirsten. Happy to be partnering on this webinar today. So I have a slide here showcasing the Certified Licensing Professionals suite of credentials. We offer 3 credentialing programs, the CLP Associate, which is geared towards licensing IP professionals that are early in their career or perhaps returning to the field after a career change. Then we offer the CLP certification. This is our flagship professional certification program that serves to validate expertise and knowledge of licensing professionals. To earn the CLP credential requires at least 3 years of experience, along with a bachelor's degree and passing the certification exam. And then we also offer the CLP Emeritus, which is for individuals who've retired from full-time work but previously held the CLP credential. So for any CLP credential holders on the webinar today, you can certainly use this webinar session for credit towards recertification, or if you're interested in the CLP associate, the webinar accounts for credit towards that education or training requirement. So if we go to the next slide, I mentioned the CLP exam content. These are the 5 content areas covered on the CLP exam and that really make up the CLP credentialing programs. The webinar today will touch on areas related to the agreement development and drafting and negotiation content areas. So I will put the CLP website, web address, as well as email address in the chat. Would love to talk about any questions you might have about CLP programs or how we might support your professional development as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley, and really appreciate the partnership on this webinar. And I was glad to have an excuse to get Lisa, Rick, and Nikisha and I back together for this. It was a lot of fun when we developed this series 5 years ago. And there was a lot of work that went into this series as well. So this slide is just an overview of that series from 2021 that I mentioned. Katie from OUP in the chat is going to put in a link to all of these webinars. So the YouTube link to these. But I just wanted to briefly mention that we divided these webinars up in a way that we really felt was helpful to people to understand how licensing to startups works out of academic institutions, kind of giving them an overview of what the purpose of all of this licensing potentially is, how the license process and the license pre-agreements work. Then we went into term sheets and financials of the license. And then we really dug into very specific parts of the license itself. So you can see that in part 4 and part 5, where we had different portions of the license that we went through in depth. This session today, if we go to the next slide, won't be as in-depth as all of those were, but we are going to rehash certain sections, as I mentioned, as well as introduce some different topics that have come up since then and that we wanted to share with the audience as well. So Lisa will be talking about fields of use, net sales definitions and sublicensing consideration. Keisha will be talking about what makes negotiations work and milestones. And Rick will be talking about startup-friendly licensing practices. And with that, I will go ahead and pass the mic to Lisa.
Fantastic. Thank you. Could we go to the next slide? Great. So the field of use is the technical area that the university is granting a license in. And just to give an example to start us off that relates to my portfolio, which is mostly medical devices and medical technologies, if the university has a patent that covers a compound that can be used in the central nervous system as a therapeutic, and we have a startup who has expertise in Alzheimer's, an appropriate field of use for that startup could be therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to talk about what other fields could be and why. So typical fields of use, it is possible to create an exclusive license in all fields of use. That's generally done when we feel as though the startup would have the potential to either enact in all fields of use. That may be because the technology is primarily limited to one technical space, or that the startup maybe has connections or the ability to do sublicensing for fields that they're not going to be utilizing. And we certainly know that investors, for the most part, would like startups to have the broadest field of use possible. There are times, though, where that might not be appropriate. It also might not be the best thing strategically for the company or the university or both. That's usually where the technology is a platform technology. So if this same compound could somehow miraculously also be used in the automotive industry or some other, offshoot, in my portfolio, it's more likely that technologies have a human use and a veterinary use. Those are generally employed by two different companies instead of the same one. And in those cases, I would license the same technology to one company for human medical use and to another company for the vet use. And then that's an exclusive license in a field. They each have an exclusive license, but those fields of use are separate and don't overlap with one another. In some cases, we have two licensees who are so aligned in the way that they want to pursue a technology, and we can't really, there's no distinguishing factor between them that would give one priority to taking license over another. I will say this happens infrequently, it's pretty rare, but in those cases, we'll grant a co-exclusive license so that those two licensees and only those two licensees have the same rights, and most often that's for all fields of use. The place where we're using non-exclusive licenses, for the most part in my office, is around software. It's definitely not the only place that we use it, but that's where it happens most frequently. So that means that many licensees can have the same access to the technology. It's not an exclusive license. There are other licensees. The utility of that in software is that software is often modular, and our researchers like using pieces of the same code on other projects. And so we don't want to limit their research or have some unintentional infringement. So if the field of use is broad, so let's say that you do have a platform technology and the company you're licensing to is initially going to be developing it in one specific area, have the expectation, if you're the company, that there are going to be diligence milestones to other fields of use to ensure that they either will be utilized by your company or that you have a plan on how to sublicense those in other fields. Next slide, please. So the change that I'm seeing in my portfolio is that parsing technologies in multiple ways is happening more frequently, especially with technologies that are platform technologies. Again, those are ones that can be used in multiple technical verticals, or for mine specifically, in use-specific medical applications. There can be some benefits to having multiple licensees. The benefit to the university, part of our mission, of course, is getting publicly funded technologies back out to the people that did that public funding. And so if we have multiple different licensees who can work in separate areas and move a technology forward, that we think is to everybody's benefit. The benefit to the company is that they have a very clear field of use, and also that they split patent costs pro rata with any other licensees for that same patent, software, or combination of intellectual property. And sometimes having a field of use that's clearly very specific to the company's expertise can be a benefit as well. So some important considerations are whether the licensee can make use of all fields of use, as I mentioned, either on their own or through sublicensing, whether there are other potential licensees that could develop other fields of the technology more readily, just because maybe they've got the manufacturing setup, the expertise, some component that it would make sense for them either to be another licensee or sublicensee. We also are always going to take it into consideration of whether having a broad field of use is really critical to the funding of a startup. That also can be very field specific. It can be challenging if you're trying to develop a new drug to not have the full rights in that field. And we also don't want to parse fields so narrowly that it has an unintended negative effect in making the license hard to read, hard to comprehend. So any license term should have the functionality that if somebody else who is not part of that negotiation at all picks up that license agreement, they should be able to understand it. So as you're creating your field of use, make sure that you're doing it in a way that's clear and as concise as possible, and is really providing the licensee with the rights that they need for everybody to be successful. Before I move on, Rick and Nikisha, is there anything you guys would like to add?
One, I get Lisa, maybe it's a question for you. You've posed this positive, you could have one situation where you have all fields of use, or another where it's got multiple applications, and maybe better to segregate the fields of use. there's a middle ground that we'll see sometimes where you're not sure and you give the licensee all fields of use, but with a mandatory sublicensing term, if they're not exploiting a field, then it'd be just good to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to talk a little bit more about that in sublicensing, but
Oh.
I can definitely do that here. That's fine. So yes, if there's a broad utility, so we had one technology and it could be used in the medical device space as a marine coating and as a coating for kitchen counters. Really unlikely that any one company was going to be able to exploit that. We had a licensee who was really interested, though, in having all fields of use at the beginning. And so we did have terms around mandatory sublicensing there was a time bound around. So if they hadn't sublicensed it or if they weren't creating a business plan to utilize it, then there was the possibility of it going back to the university for sublicensing in those areas. But mandatory sublicensing does also indicate that the licensee has the first ability to sublicense it. I want to make sure that that's clear. Great, thank you, Rick. Okay, next section, please. Fantastic. Next slide. For earned royalties, royalties are set based on comparables, market equivalents for the University of Washington or part of the OUP cohort. And along with other universities, we submit our licenses and their terms into their database. This has been really a fantastic database for our use in negotiating licenses. We want to be as fair as possible and as transparent as possible, and having comparables is certainly a part of that. Royalties are most often, in my practice, a percentage of net sales on licensed products. But in some cases, it's a per use or a per unit basis. It just depends on the technology. And net sales is the gross amount actually received by the startup or by their sublicensees, minus some standard deductions. And those deductions are things like third-party royalties or royalty stacking. So if the startup takes a license from the University of Washington, but they also need some technology from Nikisha over at Johns Hopkins, if an appropriate royalty would have been 3% for that product, we're not expecting that the licensee is going to pay each of us 3% if that's going to then make the product untenable. So instead, there's a balancing of the royalties to make it possible for that technology to be successful. It's similar for combination products, but in that case, it's typically that the company itself has intellectual property that's being combined with your intellectual property. As an example, if we were creating a car engine and we were licensing it to Honda, and Honda said, we're not going to sell the engine just as the engine, it's going to be part of the whole car, then of course, the royalty on the percentage of the car is different than it would have been on the engine itself. Royalties can also be adjusted on a time basis. This happens most often in therapeutics. If you have a royalty rate for a vaccine as it's initially being sold, that royalty is typically going to drop over time with changes in the volume. Not in every case, but that's the field where I see that most often. There's also a step down. If you're licensing a technology and it's a combination of both a patent and some copyright, maybe it's software, maybe it's something else. At the time that the patent expires, that typically is going to change your royalty if a lot of the value in that technology was based on that patent. So after the expiration of the patent, that royalty is generally going to step down. And then there also is the ability to renegotiate based on changes to the product or the market. An example from my portfolio is that we had an ultrasound toothbrush. Our technology was one of the components of it. It turned out that the cost of goods for one of the other components, the wireless charging stand, was 5 times more than they anticipated. And so each of the licensees in that ended up taking a decrease in their royalty so that the product could be sold. And then in some cases, although this is maybe a little bit more unusual, royalties can be tiered based on annual sales. Next slide, please. So when royalties are based on a percentage of net sales, there are some standard deductions. I list these here. I'm not going to go through every one, but it can be cash discounts, it could be credits, it can be some tariffs, particular kinds of sales taxes. But the thing that I really wanted to highlight is that what we're seeing is that we're getting a lot of non-standard deductions being requested recently. And these deductions are non-standard because they're already taken into consideration in the set of the percentage. So asking for an additional deduction for manufacturing fees, the fees to distribute or market, or unusual taxes, these are typically on a country by country basis, fall outside of those standard deductions and generally won't be part of the net sales definition, at least in our practice so far. Nikisha or Rick, anything that you'd want to add on royalties before I move to the next? Okay, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to go into sublicensing and sublicense consideration. I really wanted to review this because I think that there's frequently confusion over the definition of what is a sublicense, who is a sublicensee, and how sublicensing consideration is defined. So sublicensing is the ability of a licensee to grant rights in the IP that they've licensed to a third party. And that ability is allowed generally when it's an exclusive license. So the licensee has all or most of the rights in that technology and can sublicense it in other areas. Sometimes there are approvals that are required by the licensor. There generally are going to be for that licensor, for the university to review the sublicense to make sure that it has all the required terms. In our template, we don't have that requirement, but we do request that particular terms from the license are in the sublicense. Also, the request is that a copy is provided to the university. This can be to everybody's benefit, so that if we see product sales for a technology that we know has our IP, we don't recognize the licensee, it's great to be able to look and see that they have a sublicense and not think that they're an infringer. The licensee is going to be liable for the acts of a sublicensee. So if you're the licensee doing the sublicensing, make sure that you vet your sublicensees well. There are rare cases where we allow sublicensing in non-exclusive licenses, but in general, it's just the preference of the university to have that next third party also take a non-exclusive license. Mandatory sublicensing is what Rick mentioned. So if a company takes a license that could be utilized in multiple different verticals and they're not pursuing all their verticals. So let's say it's the medical technology that could be used in human and veterinary applications, but the company right now is just pursuing the human applications, even though they have rights to everything. If a veterinary company approaches the university or that licensee for a license, then that mandatory sublicensing language kicks in, and it generally indicates that the licensee has the first ability to sublicense to that organization if it's an appropriate company that could take that technology forward, or they can present the university with their path forward of how they would do development in that market. And if neither of those is happening, then the university has the ability to move forward. Sublicensing and diligence milestones and milestone payments. This is just to mention that the sublicensee can fulfill those just like the licensee could. Sorry, next slide, please. I'm going to take a little water too. Okay, so this is a place where we get a lot of questions. Who's considered a sublicensee? So any third party that needs to access the licensed technology, licensed IP, granted under the license, especially those that need to make, use, or sell the licensed IP, or sell, use, modify, or display copyrighted IP, they're going to typically need a sublicense. Examples of some situations where somebody would need a sublicense are a company is taking a license to a field of use within the license grant. So that veterinary company is taking a sublicense to that use within the medical company's broader field. There are also collaborators that may need to access the licensed IP because they're selling it, they're using it, they're making it one of the criteria above. And then most OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, will need a sublicense. For parties that generally don't need a sublicense, that's often distributors. If their role really is only to sell licensed products on behalf of a sublicensee or on behalf of a licensee, they generally don't need a sublicense. Next slide, please. And then to briefly go through sublicensing consideration. So product sales, royalties, that's just a flow through. If the university sets a 3% royalty, it doesn't matter to us whether the 3% is from our licensee or the sub-licensee. It just flows through. There isn't a cap above that. For non-royalty sub-licensing consideration, this is where we have the most questions. So let's say that we have a license and the university gets 20% of any sub-licensing consideration that's not the royalties. If there's a $2 million sub-license that's done, we would get our 20% of that. That would be 400K. But if in that sub-license, part of those funds, $1 million of those funds are going to go straight to research and development, we don't have that as part of our sub-license consideration. That's going to the development of the technology. So we would get our 20% on $1 million instead of $2 million. And importantly, because we get this question a lot as well, our sublicense consideration is based on the percent of the sublicense that's related to our technology. So if there are other technologies that are included in that sublicense consideration, then the university's share is going to be dropped down appropriately. I would also just say that is usually a term that is indicated in the license by saying that there will be a future negotiation, and that's because it's hard to predict at the time that you're writing the license what some future sublicense is going to have in terms of the technology that it includes. So the parties will then at that time work together in good faith to create what an appropriate percentage will be to the university.
I want to pause on that one because that's something I'm covering in my slides. I'm really glad to hear University of Washington deals with that up front by putting that allocation in, because most university templates don't do that. So in terms of startup friendly practices, for universities to be thinking ahead, well, that's, yes, if you're bundling the UW technology with the Johns Hopkins technology, then there should be some allocation on that non-royalty sublicensing consideration. And few universities actually have that in their forms now. Or I see a lot without it.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's a really good point. Additionally, I think it's important that as startups are considering their sublicenses, they should consider putting these things into the license so it's very clear, and that the university has very little to negotiate or has questions about.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. And the one thing that I'll also mention here is that sublicensing consideration can either be a flat percentage across the lifetime of the license, or it can be related. It'll drop down over time as the company hits certain performance milestones. And to hear more about milestones, I'm going to hand it over to Nikisha as part of her part.
And I'm just going to really quickly before Nikisha goes, I'm going to have us actually go through all the slides before we answer questions live. Lisa, Nikisha, and Rick, we have a lot of questions that have come in. And Lisa, I'm actually going to recommend maybe as Nikisha's going through slides, maybe you can answer some of these questions, just typing them. And I think a lot of them you'll be able to answer pretty quickly for some folks. But I can just tell everyone who's on this webinar right now, we're going to end up going long. We've already have over 20 questions that have come in. So we'll definitely get through all the slides, by the top of the hour, but we'll be answering questions probably for another half an hour after that, just people know how this is going to roll. So with that, we'll pass it over to Nikisha then.
Oh, thank you. So today we're going to explore what makes negotiations work well with startup CEOs, and then dive into milestones. So buckle up because this journey is going to be insightful and I hope fun. So let's start things off with a critical question. So what makes for a good faculty, student, or otherwise CEO, especially when so many of them didn't really envision themselves stepping into this role? It's quite a leap. Being thrust into the startup spotlight doesn't quite match with the classic PhD journey we often imagine. For transparency, some of these considerations were learned by me via the OUP learning cohort that I attended, I think, a year or two ago. One key quality is visionary leadership, which involves articulating a clear direction and purpose. So a good CEO must understand market needs and leverage innovation to ensure the technology meets real-world demands. They also need expertise and credibility. In the rapidly evolving landscape of biotech, having technical knowledge not only facilitates product development, but it builds trust with your team and stakeholders. And even if the CEO doesn't have direct expertise, being able to access it, gain access to it, or find someone who has it that's willing to work with the company or the team is important. Being able to identify funding opportunities through grants, investors, and partnerships, demonstrating the ability to develop compelling pitches to secure investments becomes a vital skill in ensuring their vision has the resources necessary to bring things to life. To be clear, in the current climate right now, navigating the intricacies of funding can be, and based on a bunch of feedback that we've received from current CEOs, is very daunting. Limited resources often mean that startups must be creative about securing funding and open to everyone in the startup pitching in where appropriate. But that's not all. Resilience and adaptability are also key. Because let's face it, this journey can get bumpy, and a CEO must navigate through challenges and be ready to learn from feedback. Become an expert at time management so that they can, in some cases, balance academic responsibilities with the demands of running a startup where appropriate. And remember, as Kenny Roger wisely said, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. The ability to pivot, make quick decisions, and stand by those decisions, even when everything feels uncertain, is sometimes just as critical as sticking to your original plan. Next slide. So now let's dive into our next topic, which is interpersonal and networking skills that can drive the success in a startup environment. Building and leading diverse teams is essential for fostering a culture of innovation. A successful CEO must convey a sense of urgency, a pressing need to move the team, speed up product development, and push the entire company forward. Think of biotech as this thrilling race. If you're not moving at the required pace, you'll quickly find yourself in the slow lane, and no one wants that. Additionally, as leaders, it's their responsibility to resolve conflicts effectively and motivate team members towards a common goal. So teamwork isn't just a buzzword, it's necessary. A successful startup CEO must articulate ideas clearly to stakeholders, investors, and team members. Remember, if you can't convey technical concepts in an accessible manner, your brilliant ideas may stay in the shadows. Eagerness to learn and adapt is a trait that sets successful leaders apart. A great leader actively seeks knowledge and feedback from mentors, experts, and teammates, and sometimes the person mopping the floor. You don't know what people know. In our ever-changing industry, embracing new perspectives and committing to continuous improvement is key to thriving. Lastly, the value of establishing connections with academic industry and investor ecosystems cannot be overstated. Building partnerships and seeking mentorship can open new doors and create pathways for growth. So network, and do some more networking. Every person is a potential connection to your next big opportunity. So that is really kind of my lead in to kind of just CEOs. Did Lisa or Rick have any feedback or anything additional to add?
Yeah, I would add, we work with a lot of PhDs who get their degree and then take their work from the university and spin it out in companies. And what we've observed is, and even though they may not think of them as themselves this way, but they are often absolutely the right person to be CEO at that time and capable of it. No one knows the science better than they do, and they certainly have the intellectual horsepower to learn what they need to learn. And you guys, in my experience, there's two things. One is these soft skills are super important because you do have to work, and you need these soft skills. You need to work with a lot of people. You need to hear a lot of ideas and be able to take that feedback in. And there's also that curiosity, the curiosity you brought to the science. It's like you are going to have to learn new things to be effective, or you're going to have people on your team, consultants or advisors, employees to help you. Finance is a good one because maybe that's not been in your realm in the academic world, but you need to have a solid understanding of how the numbers all work to figure out how to develop a company and have your curiosity about learning that. or find the right people to bring on the team. But the idea is to think of yourself in that leadership position, because you're absolutely able to do that. And at some point, the company may outgrow you, and you need to go on this really growth trajectory where you need to raise a lot of money and do a lot of partnering, and you need a different set of skills as CEO. But often at the early stages, the researchers are the right people to be CEO.
Yeah, and I really appreciate these slides. We've shared them with our postdoc program where we have postdocs for a year, and the intent is that at the end of the year, they're spinning out a company. And having them look over this range of hard and soft skills has really helped to set expectations of what they should have in their pocket when they actually leave our program. So thank you.
Okay. So let's shift gears and delve into an operational aspect that's needed, and that's working with the University Tech Transfer Office. So clear, early, and consistent communication is absolutely paramount. This approach builds trust, clarifies intentions, and helps prevent any misleading or mislicensing issues. Remember, transparency will set the tone for a successful partnership, and this partnership is a theme throughout. Next, understanding and aligning with university intellectual property policies is crucial. You need to familiarize yourself with the internal policies, the Bayh-Dole Act, ask questions, and perform many of your own due diligences to ensure ownership clarity and avoid potential complications down the road. Don't forget flexibility and license structures. Think exclusive versus non-exclusive. Lisa very nicely touched on this before. You'll want to adapt your agreements based on market needs while being mindful of patent costs and what your company actually needs. So speaking of costs, let's talk about balanced financial terms that address risk and reward. Prepare to negotiate those terms to create a win-win situation for both parties. That's a whole nother day. So I'm not going to go too deeply into that. Professionalism and respect for the process cannot be overstated. Communication should flow smoothly through the tech transfer office to maintain alignment, to protect both parties' interests. Demonstrating your commitment through prompt responses and clear documentation can help move this process along so much more quickly. So governance and investor-related protections sometimes play a role. TTOs often seek board observer rights and align future funding without interfering in governance. Although this will be institution dependent, aligning interests across stakeholders fosters effective commercialization and builds, again, long-term relationships with the TTO. And this is something every CEO should strive for. So keeping these points in mind, you will not only navigate the complexities of working with the TTO more effectively, but also lay the groundwork for a thriving partnership. Now, I didn't talk about milestones because that's next, but I wanted to see if Lisa or Rick had anything to add to this slide. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this is by far my favorite topic. I love a good milestones. So let's take a closer look at the importance of milestones in driving the success of the technology, the startup, and the needs of the TTO. So what exactly are milestones? They represent specific achievements or objectives that a startup must reach to demonstrate progress in the development or commercialization of the licensed technology. First off, milestones are essential for performance measurements. They provide clear framework for assessing progress, allowing both the startup and the university to track development effectively. Since universities do not ever want to provide a license to a company only to have that technology languish and not be developed into a product, milestones help set clear expectations for what needs to be achieved within specific timeframes. Now let's consider risk management and accountability. Setting milestones helps identify potential risks early on, ensuring both parties remain accountable throughout the project timeline. If those milestones aren't met, it's considered a breach of the agreement and the university can terminate a license. Though on a practical basis, a university does not want to terminate a license. Rather, it wants to engage in discussions with the company about why it's unable or unwilling to meet the milestones. The result is hopefully an amendment to resolve the matter such that development and partnership, again, can continue. Moreover, milestones play a critical role in facilitating collaboration. Maybe, just maybe, there's an opportunity for the startup to fund work in the researcher's lab that's consistent with some shared research goals. Sponsored research agreements can foster a collaborative environment where innovation can thrive. Milestones also establish a timeline. They set clear deadlines, enabling everyone involved to align their efforts towards shared goals, which keep our momentum intact and moving forward. Lastly, let's not forget financial incentives, a powerful motivator. When your startup wins, so does the university. Achieving milestones often trigger payments, giving universities a direct financial interest in the development success. Achieving specific milestones may unlock funding for the startup, acting as a motivational tool for the entire team and further driving success. In summary, milestones are not just boxes to check, although we love it when you check those boxes. They are essential tools in managing project progress, risk, and collaboration. By understanding and leveraging these milestones, we ensure that our journey towards success is both effective and efficient. So let's move forward with a clear sense of purpose. Lisa and Rick, did I miss anything? Okay, next slide. Now that we've covered the concept of milestones, let's dive into the different types of milestones you might encounter. So these are a mix of milestones from various technology types. Think of them as milestones in a marathon, each one a major stopping point on your journey to success. Let's lead off this group with early diligence milestones. These have frequent deadlines that help you stay on track and typically have low to no fees, although this is institution and negotiation specific. First up is fundraising. So this is the lifeblood of any startup. Reaching these financial milestones can feel like securing a lifeboat in a storm and is absolutely needed for anything else down the line to occur. If there's no money, there's nothing else. Next is time for validation. You know, when your genius idea goes from being a hopeful thought to a proven concept. Then for devices comes prototype development. This is your chance to turn your dreams into tangible models. And for therapeutics, we tackle that lead candidate identification, the moment when you find your star player in the lab. As we move on, we hit the regulatory submission process, a critical phase that includes everything from animal testing to a host of filings like 510K, IND, and some early clinical trials. Is your technology safe, and does it work to a level that a regulatory authority deems appropriate? Remember, the path to compliance may be winding, but it's essential. And let's not overlook these later development milestones where timelines can get a bit fuzzy, but the rewards are often attached to nice fees and hopefully assurances that your product is close to having an impact. Next on our list is regulatory approvals. This is where you'll be seeking those all-important NDAs, BLAs, and ANDAs. If you thought navigating regulatory waters was tough, wait until you experience the joy of learning all of the FDA acronyms. Don't forget about sales milestones. What's the point in working so hard if you can't celebrate that first commercial sale and seeing your product in and for people? That's like the finish line tape that you want to break through. In a nutshell, from fundraising to regulatory triumphs, understanding these milestones is key to navigating your startup's road to success. So let's lace up your running shoes and let's keep the momentum going. Lisa and Rick, did I miss anything? Okay, let's go on to the next thing. So since milestones are my jam, I think I just dated myself. I want to share some common early milestones for technology types that I come across most often. After chatting with a few colleagues, I didn't want to leave out these digital technologies, which are often becoming much more common. And therefore, many of those may closely follow some of the device milestones. And maybe Lisa and Rick may have some feedback later. So this is where I have the most fun. So I prefer to have many frequent early milestones to promote check-ins. I mean, you will likely need to do all of these things anyway, so why not put it in writing? But for clarity, although we as TTOs like them. A startup may not, because they are additional obligations that attach to the license and then to potential acquirers. But recall here that our goal is to make sure that the product continues to move forward at a steady pace. So I'm not going to go through all of these in details. I really just wanted to give some examples. But in the device category, we kick things off with prototype completion and design verification. Then comes the all-important design freeze. This is basically when you have to stop tweaking your masterpiece and get down to business. For therapeutic milestones, you'll want to focus on, again, lead optimization and candidate selection. Think of it as picking your dream team for the big game and then hoping that the IND and clinical phase 1 clinical trial stage gets you into the playoffs for phase 2, phase 3, and a product. And don't forget the diagnostic milestones. Here you'll establish your analytical validation plan and dive into prototype assay development. Completing clinical validations is like that icing on the cake before you get to the big regulatory submission. So whether it's devices, digital therapy, digital technologies, therapeutics, or diagnostics, these early milestones can lay the groundwork for path to your success. So let's charge ahead. Now, I understand that this is one of favorites of some slides because there are so many examples. Rick, Lisa, did you have any feedback here?
The one thing I would say for the the prospective licensees out there is that this is for an exclusive license. These milestones are a very important term for the universities because they've given you exclusivity, and so they need to see that you're on a path to bringing product to market. And as Nikisha said, she likes frequent check-ins because, hey, if the company's not going to bring it to market and they want to find someone else to do it. So the idea is to that the university can see you're on the path. And when you're looking at these, there will be dates associated with them. But the other thing to look at about these is to make sure these are on your path. If these are things you want to say for each one of these things, there's no company if I don't do this. Like I have to do this or there's no company. So I shouldn't be resisting these in here. If there's some in here that I say, well, if I go this certain regulatory pathway, I don't need to do this. Well, then maybe it shouldn't be a milestone. But to figure out what are the milestones that are essential for you to get product to market, and those should be the ones that you should be able to commit to and work to. There'll be a question about dates and the deadlines for that. But in terms of the milestones itself, that's the criteria I always talk to my licensee clients about.
And that's actually next. A little bit of that is next. It's okay, right? Great lead in. Lisa, did you have anything?
Just very briefly, I will say, for the benefit of the license agreement and the relationship, if you're not going to meet a milestone and you've been diligently pursuing it, let the university know as soon as possible. Those discussions are much easier and much better to have is in a really open and transparent way because you have the ability to make some changes. So highly recommend keeping those conversations going.
That's correct. And typically built in a license agreement is the ability to amend an agreement related to the milestones anyway. So take advantage of those things so that, again, there's transparency. So next slide. So now that we know our milestones, let's talk about where they come from. I'm not going to speak much on the fees associated here since this will be dependent on the technology and the negotiations between the tech transfer office and the startup. But milestones are typically pulled from a development plan that is requested by and required from the startup to the tech transfer office. And we need these before we can even get started putting together a term sheet. So we need to know the company's plan. Therefore, it's to everyone's benefit for the company, again, to be transparent. In particular, if they provide a development plan for all of the technologies, if there are multiple, and the pitch deck that's used for the investors, the university has kind of a full picture and a timeline. So on this slide, we have a list of examples showing the timing and description of milestones, as well as of a table, a column for payments as they may appear in agreement. So milestones can be presented in a single table, multiple table, or some prefer to write them out very succinctly. This is based on the preference of the TTO or the startup attorney, really. In short, understanding these payment structures and how they align with your milestones will be key in planning your financial roadmap. So let's keep that momentum going. So Rick and Lisa, is there anything else? Okay, next slide. So as we wrap up, let's celebrate success, because in this journey, you get a milestone, you get a milestone, and you get a milestone. Thank you for your time. And now I will turn things over to Rick.
Great. Next slide, please. We'll talk about startup-friendly licensing practices. By way of introduction, the reason I chose this topic for this webinar is that I was asked this question recently by a tech transfer office that a number of their stakeholders had, were unhappy with the licensing practices. And so someone looked me up and called me and asked me about startup-friendly licensing practices. And so that was the inspiration for these slides. And I know that tech transfer office isn't alone. I think a lot of tech transfer offices, there's, a lot of critics everywhere, but there are a lot of places where there's pressure for people to create more startup-friendly licensing practices. And it not only is it good to do because it's you have stakeholders who are pushing for it, but it also is, if they truly are startup friendly and good for the university and good for the startups and encourage more startups, that's great for everybody, which is what everybody wants. And when you look at startup-friendly licensing practices, what you hear most about is economic terms that are part of it. And TTOs may adopt practices regarding these terms in the quest to be fair and consistent, including taking equity in lieu of upfront fees. So they, often there's not cash up front, so they're saying that's fine, we'll take equity instead. Deferring patent reimbursement for a period of time or until a certain raise. And some express license terms where they say, hey, we're pre-specifying, this is the equity, this is the royalty, we've looked at all this data, we think this is fair, got no haggle terms. But other aspects of the license agreement draw less attention often than these headline economic terms. And they can have an outsized impact on the time and cost and time required to negotiate the license, and also impact the startup's perception of the whole process, whether it's friendly or not. Next slide, please. So in these slides, we're going to look at three things. One is I'm going to ask you, I think there's probably a lot of people on this webinar who are at universities, to put yourself in the startup shoes, and we're going to take a look at what that looks like. We're going to go through some things that we're seeing come up often enough that I made these bullet points for this webinar, and then finally we'll look at some startup-friendly practices. So next slide, and we can roll through this. Okay, so I'm telling all of you what you know already, those people who are in tech transfer. The university holds the pen. The agreement is almost always going to be on the university template. There for startups, there is almost, I'm not aware of ever seeing, maybe there's a one in a very large number that some reason that it wasn't done on the university's template, but generally it's going to be on the university's template. And from people looking on the outside, there's not just one university template. There's hundreds of tech transfer offices across the United States, and most of them maintain their own templates and continue to evolve them and fix them and learn new things and continue to change them. So even maybe the template, even if you worked with the university 5 years ago, they may have a different template now, it might have completely changed. And at large university systems, the state university systems, often the different campuses maintain their own templates. Sometimes there will be efforts at the system level to standardize, but in just as many cases, there's different templates across the state. And there's also significant variation on how universities handle many of what are called the legal topics in it. So from from the university standpoint, well, you use one license, it's always the same. From the outsider's perspective, there's this infinite different number of licenses you may see. Next slide, please. So the templates themselves at the universities are generally protective of the university's interests. The universities, maybe they've been doing tech transfer just for a few years or decades or maybe even a century. And they've learned from that process. And every time they learn something about the tech transfer process, they fix their template. And if it was something that happened negatively for the university, they make sure that doesn't happen again. And not only do they benefit from their own experiences licensing, but I'd say tech transfer, it's a social group. People go to Autumn, they hear what other universities do. And it's not just Autumn, there's local tech transfer groups, university systems have their tech transfer groups, and there's Association of University Lawyers where they go and they talk and they learn from each other. So these templates often reflect the collective wisdom of of not only the university and all the experiences, but hundreds of other technology transfer professionals and offices. And so what can happen is these templates become unbalanced. And we talked about an example of UW, University of Washington, where they've modified a term. I guess 10 years ago that term was different, but they put a term in now where if you have multiple sub-licensees, we're going to think about how we allocate the non-royalty sub-license consideration. But a lot of universities, that process doesn't happen so much when they develop their templates. They're always looking to fix things from the university perspective. But when the thing is that there's things that might benefit the licensee or that might occasionally get asked by the licensee, the attitude is, let them ask for it, then we can negotiate then. And there's a significant knowledge asymmetry in these negotiations with startups often. So, we have Lisa and Nikisha here, decades of experience in tech transfer, and that's going to be true of many of the people you're dealing with. And they're going to really understand the process, really understand their form. For most startup founders, unless they have a business development or tech transfer or legal background, university patent licenses are difficult to parse. As Lisa said earlier, there's a lot of confusion about sublicensing, for example. And it is something that's an example of something is understanding how that works in a license. It's not obvious. And also the startup might even be thinking like, what is even stuff? I don't even know what sublicensing is. So they get this agreement where it's really difficult for them to understand what's even happening. Next slide, please. So as a result, this may be an overstatement. They're generally not trusted by startups. Well, I think there's a lot of founders who will negotiate, will just kind of sign it. They will sign it. So I know there's a lot of experience like that where people will say, well, geez, most people sign it. And it's true that a lot of founders will just sign the university license. They'll negotiate the royalty and the equity, but not the other terms of the agreement. And, so they either just accept it as is and hope and trust that it's gonna work for them, but they are accepting the risk of accepting a largely unnegotiated agreement. And like I said, the review is typically outside of the founder's wheelhouse. Given the complexity of the license and the potential downstream effects, the founders typically are not able to evaluate anything other than the base economics of the license. And this is an area where we talked about if you're the PhD, the scientist who developed the technology and you're the founder, this is all very new to you. And this may be an area where it may be important for you to learn a little more or get the right experts around you to get the right agreement in place. And if you do want to do that kind of review and see that it's a fair and balanced agreement, it's often going to cost time for sure, and it's probably going to cost money if you're going to bring counsel in to do that, and diverting this limited resource you have of cash at the early stage. Next slide, please. And just this, I guess this slide highlights some of the complexity of it for the startup founder is that there's a lot of critical stakeholders in the picture that they just may not be thinking of all the impacts of this when they're looking at the license or even understand how to license it. For partnering, they think, well, part of the deal is I'm going to have to work with large companies, and which we're probably going to get into a category of sub-licensing. They may be just customers, but they might need a sub-license. And does it give you the necessary freedom and provide the flexibility to give the large corporate partner the rights it will need? For sale of a company, well, first you have ability to sell and without the university approval. And if you do, and this larger company steps into your shoes, and maybe they're selling higher value products, do the economics actually may even make sense anymore? And they may need to use affiliates and sublicensees in a way that you didn't do. And from the VC standpoint, does the agreement are the agreements sustainable? Does it provide the company the ability to sell, because the VCs are generally in it to sell the company? That's the most likely liquidity path today. IPO market, Kirsten mentioned one of their portfolio companies went public today, but those are pretty scarce. And most of the time, the path to liquidity for a venture-backed company is going to be selling the company. So that's how this license, what the ability to sell and how this license works with the acquirer are important questions. Next slide, please. And you can go on to the next one. So now we're going to talk about legal friction points that we see come up in negotiations with universities. And the themes are the ability to conduct and sell the business without requiring university approvals or unnecessary constraints, and gotcha in the economic terms that are buried in the legalese and not going to be obvious to the founder, CEO. Next slide, please. So these are legal. I'm not going to sort of dive deep into these, but I'll just run through why these become friction points. One is that university approvals, and for this, if sublicensing is a key part of the business strategy of the company, having to come back to the university each time to approve it, that's a burden. Why does the university even have this approval right? And one of the things I talked to a little later is that, look, the university's got important interests and they've got to protect those interests. And so maybe the university's had some bad experiences in the past where the founders form another company to get around, so-and-so, they sublicense it, and they've had this bad experience. And so now they require approvals for every single sublicense. Well, you can come up with license-friendly terms that allow the licensee to conduct business, but also weed out bad actor cases. There's lots of ways to do that, and kind of come up with that middle ground so you're not setting up a series of hurdles and approvals that the licensee is going to need just to conduct ordinary business. Sharing of non-royalty sublicensing income. Lisa already brought up the point about when you're bundling the university IP with other IP, and that's been discussed. But another one is the consideration received for R&D. So research and development costs that you get as from your corporate partner, they can fall in that definition of non-royalty sublicense income. And you look at it, and Lisa mentioned a 20% number, which is common. And it's like, well, hold on, we got $1 million. We're getting $1 million of $1 million paid by our corporate partner, and we've got a budget that we're spending $950,000 of that. So if we have to take 20% off that $1 million and pay $200,000 to university, we're way upside down. So just thinking through issues like that. Treatment of affiliates as sublicensees. Historically, a lot of universities just said the license can be extended to the affiliates. Now, I'm seeing many more universities say, no, affiliates have to get a sublicense to the university. And that can be a tricky question, especially on this non-royalty sublicense income question, because there might be, normal intercompany transfers that are staying in the family, but now all of a sudden the university looks like it's supposed to get 20% of that. Treatment of CROs and other subcontractors as sublicensees. A lot of people are dealing with that in the forums, but it can be very burdensome to treat them as a sublicensee and often isn't necessary. And another important one is rights of sublicensee in the event of license termination. I'll go to the next slide. University approval requirements, again, very similar to the one in sublicensing. Ramifications of acquirers stepping into the shoes of the startup. And this is, Lisa talked about this in her slides about combination products. And so it may be that you as the startup are making a widget. You're making the Honda example, you're making the engine, and you've thought about what are the royalties on the engine, but what if you get acquired by Honda? And the licensed product and the royalty definition is based on whatever that final product that's sold is, but then the final product that gets sold is the car. And the royalty makes no sense on the car. So thinking through those issues and from not only, okay, I'm a startup, I'm making this widget, but what does this look like because this license is going to live on? Next slide. This is getting a bit into the legal weeds, so I'm not going to spend much on here, but the exclusive nature of the license is elusive if the licensee cannot pursue infringers. The point of the exclusive license is we're the only one who can practice this patent, and there shouldn't be other people in the market who are practicing this patent. If there are, this is a critical issue. So as a startup founder, people are going to just brush over this and not really think about it much because that's so down the road. Is there really going to be litigation? Well, if you're successful, maybe. If you bring a very significant product to market, yes, there may be litigation. And there's issues that come up about who has the right to bring it. Will the university join the litigation if you bring it, and what's the ramifications if they don't, and appropriate sharing of litigation proceeds. These are things that we frequently see as negotiation points these days. Next slide. Lisa mentioned earlier about net sales definition, that there are standard, and she's seeing a lot of non-standard things. We, for example, think bad debt is a standard exception. This is becoming a negotiation. Like if you have to write off a percentage of sales and you've written them off on your financial records because you didn't collect, this is becoming a negotiation point with a lot of universities now. A common compromise is to cap it at 3 or 5% a year, but some people just refuse, and there's a negotiation around that where, again, we would have thought it was standard, but becoming a negotiation point. Insurance requirements are getting ratcheted up. We're seeing $5–10 million right out even before product. That could be a startup unfriendly practice. And there's this kind of odd one about requiring sales at fair market value, and it's kind of the implications of it are a little from a legal standpoint, a little odd. And so I will move on. Let's go to the next slide. So finally, I want to talk about startup friendly practices and, work on making your license more balanced. You've seen issues that have come up in negotiations more than once often, and you can find that middle ground where you don't need to compromise the university's interest, but figure out how to accommodate the startup's interest with guardrails for the university. And often that means being an internal champion for the startups with your university stakeholders, like your general counsel's office, your compliance, to find these balanced approach. And then one other thing that can help is being transparent about the legal aspects of your license and the rationale for those terms, and publishing your license template and FAQs on your website. And then the final slide, please, is that in my ideal world, there's a model license agreement that universities use as a starting point, and that's accepted. We work a lot in the venture capital financing world too, and in that world, almost all financings now are done on standard templates, either published by the National Venture Capital Association, the NVCA, or Y Combinator Safe. Most of what we do now is on one of those two things, and it greatly simplifies the process for everything. Even something like venture capital financing documents, which are hundreds of pages long, they're all the same. Or even for the short SAFE, again, it's so much simpler because we all know what the SAFE says, because that's how a lot of early stage capital comes in. In the ideal world, the university, from the licensee perspective, there would be the universities coming together because there are a lot of common interest. And in my mind, it's feasible, but there hasn't been a groundswell to do that. But for yourself, considering model templates developed outside the university, and I use the US Bolt Life Science License Agreement template, which is linked in these slides. If you're in tech transfer or on licensee side, and you want to be involved in helping develop model agreements, to develop trusted model tech transfer resources, there is a recently launched model agreements special interest group within Autumn, and we are going to be meeting for the first time in person this coming Tuesday. So the timing of this webinar was good. It's not at the convention center. It's a short walk from the convention center in the Capitol room. Not in the conference schedule, so mark it in your calendar if you can make it. And there's a new e-group, so we'll be communicating on these topics through autumn. And if you want to get added to it, you can email Katie Ventris at autumn, and she will have you added. And in chat is Katie's email address if you just want to send her an email and get added to the e-group if this is an area of interest for you working on model agreements. Any last feedback, observations, Lisa or Nikisha?
Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Nikisha. Thank you, Lisa. So just FYI, everyone, this is the contact information for everyone. We will be sending out the slides to everyone afterwards, so don't fret. You will receive a copy of the slides and then a copy of the recording as well. We are going to take some time now to answer questions. So we understand that some people have to leave. Some people have already had to leave just because we're over the top of the hour. But we're going to take some time for questions right now. I know Lisa and Nikisha have been typing away furiously because we used to have like 30 some questions and now we're down to 12. So thank you all. And if you did have a question and you didn't see the answer to it yet, just go into the Q&A. And there should be a way for you to see the answers that they've typed in. But I am going to go through some of the questions that are remaining, as well as some of the questions that were asked to us prior, that were sent to us prior. So first, I think kind of some way a softball question to you, Lisa. I'm going to direct it to you first. For co-exclusive licenses, what does that agreement look like? Is a three-way agreement, or does is there a separate license with each entity, and do they just reference each other? So, Lisa.
Great question. So there are two separate licenses. They have parallel terms. The field of use in particular is the same. We usually, I'm trying to think, is that right? We often identify the other party, but we do make it clear that there are only two co-exclusive licensees. Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, separate license agreements. It's not a three-way agreement.
So how does that usually come about, though? I mean, do you typically have the two companies coming together at around the same time?
Yep, I have two of these happening right now. And in my 22 years in the office, I think that'll make, like I'll have three total in my portfolio. And in both cases, we have inventors who've co-invented a technology who each want to create a startup and are interested in pursuing in the same area. And thankfully, in at least one of the cases, it's a very friendly path forward. So they both want to have all rights, even though they're initially going to be pursuing different rights. And so for that reason, we think it's going to be manageable.
Thanks. Rick, next question to you. This comment is about what they find that one of the biggest legal friction points is warranties, indemnities. Could you just comment on that from your view, having been on both sides, about that the universities typically require that the licensee indemnifies them, et cetera. So we talked about this on a previous webinar, but just having been on both sides, could you just comment on the area?
Yeah, so I first lived the life from the university standpoint, where I'd say the common approaches are for warranties. People have been asking for some warranties about the intellectual property, that's the patents that are being licensed. And the indemnity issue is unbalanced. And I would say this is one place where I say that's generally we tell our clients that's okay. You need to understand it, but that's okay. On the warranty side, I would say there's a lot of things that are outside the knowledge of the tech transfer office that they can't control. So it is a natural reaction. They're going to say, we're going to do everything we can to tell you this is true and look at our things. But we don't know. The fact is, our faculty member go off and sign things. Like they go consult with private companies and they sign things. And maybe that creates an encumbrance. And we all should do diligence. That's a good thing to do. But we as a university cannot guarantee it. We can't guarantee these things. We'll tell you to our knowledge. And I was an advocate of that, and I'm as licensee counsel, I am comfortable with that. But I'm comfortable with it. Someone's got to do your own diligence and interview the inventors. And then if they say they're consulting with you through these companies, look at those agreements. See if they assigned IP to those companies when it should have gone to the university instead. And do your own homework, because those are going to be those kind of common areas that are going to come up. On the indemnity, the university position I'm well aware of is, look, you're going to go bring products to market, and hey, they're going to be like going into people, and people might get sick, bad things may happen, and you need to take responsibility of that. We've developed something, we've got some early inventions that look promising in this area, but you have to do all the safety and testing. And we're not going to be responsible, and you're fully responsible. So you bring it to market, we need indemnification. And I don't really know what, and so for me, it's sort of indemnification with guardrails. Like we'll indemnify for what we do, but if you've done something wrong, maybe that needs to be excluded from the indemnification. But I don't have a similar argument for, I could say, I don't feel as strongly about it. You could come up with cases where the licensee might need indemnification. Well, if the university licensed it already exclusively to someone else, then indemnify. So you can come up with these cases like that where it should, maybe you can make an argument. But in the experiences, universities are extremely resistant. State universities sometimes just can't because of their constitutions. And the private ones have huge endowments. They're not going to put that at risk. So the question is it worth it? Is this a big enough business issue that you want to escalate it to the vice president or whatever to get this approved? Sometimes you might get it approved, but it's going to be something. There's going to be a lot of antibodies at the university fighting against that particular approach.
Any comments, Lisa and Nikisha?
I agree. I always say ask questions maybe 3 times and then ask it one more time, because sometimes on that 4th time, the faculty or whoever you're talking to will go, oh, that's right. I remember that I did this 3 years ago. And so doing your own due diligence is important. The other consideration is that the university is not a commercial entity. We're not going to be the ones that are putting out the product. And so therefore, it's incumbent on the company to indemnify us. And thank you so much, Rick, for understanding. These are conversations that we typically have with new folks in the startup area or new attorneys. But if you're experienced and have been working with universities, you typically come into it with the understanding that these are typically considerations that the university cannot move on.
And I want to point out something else, which is I do have a lot of empathy for the workload and the job of the tech transfer officers, because they have these huge, big portfolios of a lot of different IP they're managing, a lot of different licenses. And if you're to come in and say, well, it should be your job to go figure out what the faculty member's done, and whether they sign these other agreements, that isn't really part of the job description. I think the faculty member might not respond well to it, and you may not only do not have the time, but you might not even have the experience to evaluate all these things. So, yes, it would be great in an ideal world to get the university to warrant that. But even if they warrant it, it might not be right. It's like someone needs to go read the agreements and understand it and do the due diligence to see it's right, because you have too many people, too many factors there at the university to control.
All right, we're going to move on. We actually didn't cover patent expenses in this particular webinar, but we still get a lot of questions on it. And we did talk about patent expenses in the previous webinars as well, so I'm going to reference back to, but because we got so many questions, Nikisha, I'm going to ask you one question, and Lisa, I'm going to ask you a subsequent question. So the question on patent expenses is, you're dealing with a startup company here. What are the expectations for covering those patent expenses by the startup, considering all of the other expenses potentially that this early stage startup has? And then the follow up to that, still for you, Nikisha, is what do you do, if they start falling behind on those payments? And then the question to you, Lisa, is going to be how you deal with this in co-exclusive licenses. So, Nikisha.
Wow, a loaded question. So typically patent expenses under an exclusive license in particular are required. So in particular for nonprofit organizations, we cannot be deemed as supporting the business unit of a company. We are a nonprofit, so we cannot be supporting a for-profit entity's business per se. So if we are paying for the patent expenses, we are supporting their business. So typically we understand that startups will come to the table with limited resources. And so we try and provide them information at the onset. What are the patent expenses? They could be a lot, they could be little. We let them know that ongoing patent expenses are absolutely a requirement, and they have to be paid in real time, because the startup company is usually at that point in time, helping us make decisions with respect to the patents and how we respond to the patent office, because it should be consistent with their business model and their intended product. With respect to understanding that they sometimes come or start cash poor, we try and create a situation where we have a payment plan and we can have the patent expenses paid out upfront with respect to their funding. Remember, we talked about funding milestones. So sometimes the funding milestones will come with a requirement to pay back patent expenses. Sometimes we'll put a payment plan to just give them time to pay it over time, maybe a certain amount every couple of months. And additionally, we sometimes just try and think in terms of what is reasonable. Now, if a company gets behind on patent expenses after trying to do everything that we can at the onset to set them up for success moving forward, we are happy to amend the license as long as we are not creating a deeper hole for both the university and the startup. So I think it's a discussion, and I think transparency. So if the startup comes to us and say, hey, and this is a common conversation right now. I mean, like weekly conversations with different startups. Hey, the market is really tough right now. We've had discussions with 50 different potential venture groups or investors, and no one's ready to lead our next round. We need more time. But having that conversation and understanding where they are in the process goes a long way to the tech transfer understanding what they've been doing and gives us confidence that they're just not sitting on their laurels. And some companies are not doing the due diligence, but there are many companies where we can see it. We know that they've had discussions with 15 different venture groups in the last 2 weeks because they've come to us and said, hey, are you really doing these things? So the tech transfer community is small. We all have connections in the investor space and we all talk to one another. So that's important to note.
Lisa, do you want to talk about co-exclusive?
Sure, absolutely. Having a co-exclusive license, really the only time that you can do that is to have those licensees at the same time. Otherwise, there's not that option. You can't establish a co-exclusive license later, or at least I haven't seen that happen. Because of that, if it's really co-exclusive, the rights are identical to both licensees, it makes splitting patent costs very simple. It's just in half. That's probably the easiest pro rata patent cost split. So you're not concerned about, was one of the licenses later in time, and so they didn't have to pay as much of the back patent costs, any of those other things that come up when you're talking about how to split patent costs. So that's the most straightforward way.
And enforcement rights are also in the kind of the same. And then could you also just touch on like if you're doing field exclusives, there's just a lot of negotiation that ends up happening around that if you end up doing the field exclusives and
Yeah, absolutely. So for a licensee to have standing to pursue their enforcement rights, especially infringement cases, they generally have to, unless the university has changed ownership to that licensee, and I will say certainly for state institutions, but really I don't know of any universities that change ownership of the patent. It means that the university is going to have to also stand up because they're the patent owner. So they'd have to be joined in that case. And as the license gets parsed into more areas, you may have more parties that need to join to be able to enforce those rights. And so we do identify that in our license agreements.
terrific. So I'm going to read this one off. It's a little bit long. I think it's about sublicensing, Nikisha and Rick and Lisa. You all can answer. So what are your thoughts on sublicensing when the licensor holds equity in the startup. It says a seemingly irrational argument is that paying an excessive sublicensing fee results in the company not being able to put funds back into value creation. So this is often one of the things people are talking about is what's the right balance between how much people are paying for their when they do a sublicense, the monies that are coming in versus how much the university takes as for part of their sublicense sharing on that. So could you just talk about, sorry, Rick, go ahead.
No, I'll be happy to jump in on that one.
Okay. Well, Ricky, why don't you go ahead and jump in and start talking about this? Because this is an area of a lot of conversation about the universities and their sublicense sharing. So Rick, and then it looks like
Yeah.
Lisa wants to talk about it too. So
Yeah. Well, I have two general thoughts on it. And first is I think that it should never be structured to be excessive, although sometimes it is. And the general idea, my understanding of the general idea is that the reason you have to start even talking about something like 20% is that this is supposed to be consideration you received for just like I'd say it's just sublicensing the rights. There's no cost of goods sold or anything. It's like this is gravy. It's like you're giving someone rights, and then sometimes there are, like I'd call it like a naked sublicense. We're like we're throwing everything over the court to you. You just take it, and then you can say, well, we're going to get this big pot of money, and this is all profit for us, and so we give 20%, and that doesn't seem crazy. But in the example I gave earlier, but if on the other hand, if it's more than that, if you're expected to do a bunch of development work, then that 20% doesn't work. So what it gets down to then is what's the definition of non-royalty sublicense consideration? And have you excluded from it the real costs that sublicense that are really imposed on you? And we find that to be a real negotiation sometimes these days, because if you don't get it right, then it is excessive. So that'd be the first thing, to make sure you're just paying on that sort of profit part of it. And then the second part is yeah, we do see things that we just think are really high, that are numbers where they're way more than 20%. And I think it was in Lisa's slide we talked, well, sometimes they're going to be reduced. So, and which we think is fair, that over time, as the company makes an investment and gets further along developmentally, that there's a lot more that's going into the sublicense. It's not just the IP rights. There's been, in many cases, tens of millions of dollars of development that's gone in it to get to this point, and at which case 20% doesn't make sense anymore. So I think it's a combination of both. Do you have the right? Yes, you shouldn't have excess ones. And do you have the right carve outs from the definition? And is it really appropriate given the level of investment that the company might have made at the time of sublicensing?
Lisa.
I think Rick covered that really well. I was just going to underscore the same carve out that's related to research and development. That's the one that we get asked about the most. If half of this or more than half of the sublicensing consideration is going to R&D, why would you get a percentage? And the answer from the University of Washington is we don't.
And one more point I want to highlight on that is that for a lot of companies, it may not just be an R&D reimbursement. It may be an upfront payment or a milestone payment. So this is where we often have a negotiation. It's like, well, there's an upfront payment of $1 million, but you're required to do this work. Or you're required to do this, and then you get another milestone payment. And it's not called R&D expenses. It's called milestone payments. So often there'll be a negotiation. Well, it's not called R&D. How do we do it? But there's ways to put language in that protect the university and protect the startup. And we find that that's like often negotiated, a negotiated point.
Great. Thank you, Rick. All right. We're going to finish up our webinar. We do have a few remaining questions yet. We're going to try to follow up with the people directly on those. If you have further questions for our panelists, we did put their email addresses in the decks. Feel free to follow up with them with these questions. They are obviously experts in the area. They really like talking about what it is that they do. They've all been doing it for a very long time. I'm just going to note a couple of themes here that I heard throughout this, and that honestly, I heard it when we first did this series, 5 years ago, which is one is this is all about communication. Negotiation is about communication. It is about communicating and understanding the other side's perspectives and what their priorities are and trying to meet so that each party has its priorities emphasized in the agreement in a way that is appropriate. And sometimes you can meet all of those priorities. It's just a matter of listening to each other and getting there. Sometimes you can't. And then it's okay not to have a deal. Like that that does happen. Um, that being said, there are ways that universities are looking at trying to do this more efficiently. They've been looking at this for a very long time. I think all of our universities would love to have ways that their jobs could be easier, because as Rick mentioned, the jobs are demanding. We're very excited about some of these model agreement initiatives that have been looked at in the past and that we're continuing on with these conversations. And so it's always really good hearing from everyone. And I hope that everyone also heard today how willing everyone is to talk about what it is that they're everything to do with the licenses. And the universities are always willing to listen and to negotiate. That's a lot of what this comes down to is negotiations. And it's very hard to have one size fits all on everything. So those are just a few themes that I heard. Any last comments, Lisa, Rick, and Nikisha? No. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate all of you coming back. Thank you to CLP for co-hosting with us. And thank you to our audience for bearing with us, for overtime as usual, because our subjects are always end up being, we can always get so many questions in. So we really appreciate that. We're going to try to make some of our webinars longer in the future so that everyone just knows ahead of time. So Ashley, thank you for joining us. And thank you, everyone. And we'll post this and get the slides out soon. So take care.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Bye.